Here we go. So we are recording. So I want to welcome Charles Arian to the virtual Chicago. The weather you've got is much better than what we have with the ice storm last night, and we're managing through it. So thanks for taking the time to be here. What we'd like to do is just spend some time together, sharing, really learning about you, from you. We all have your resumes. We all have the texts that you asked us to download. So if you want to why don't you start by just sharing a little bit about your background and then maybe go into the text study, and we'll go on from there. And my hope for our meeting, as I said, is a 30 to 45 minute time frame. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So I've been a rabbi now for a while. Sid and I actually overlapped at HUC, although I was a couple years ahead of him. And I started my career working for Hillel. I actually spent 2 years in Israel after ordination, but then came back, worked for Hillel. While I was working for Hillel, as is not uncommon, my practice became a little bit more traditional, and I concluded that if I were to go into a pulpit, I probably would be more comfortable in a conservative pulpit, and so I switched over to the Rabbinical Assembly. I've been a pulpit rabbi for a total of 18 years, but I also spent 4 years working as the Jewish staff scholar at the Institute for Christian and Jewish Studies in Baltimore, which is really one of the sort of premier jobs in the field of Christian-Jewish relationships, and also spent a year as a scholar in residence at a Trappist Abbey in Northern California, which was a lot of fun. Now, while I'm not actively looking for a new position, I know Michael Belinsky well since the Hillel days, and I actually applied for this particular position, although not the exact same division of responsibilities, many years ago, and I was the runner-up at that time to Ira Udevin. And I've been to Chicago for meetings and so on, and it's always been sort of a place that I have, although I never lived there, had a deep affection for. And so when this job became available, I thought I would toss my kippah into the ring. I think I have a wide gamut of experiences in various areas of the rabbinate. And I also love informal education. So at least to me, it seems like a good fit. It's to be determined if you all feel the same way. So should I go into the text now?
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay,
great. So this text appears at the beginning of Sidur Sim Shalom. Although when I teach it to congregants, I often say, and if you got there early enough, you would know this text, but it's usually not the case. But on the surface, it sort of seems like a nice touchy-feely text, but in actuality, and I should add that I'm teaching colleagues in a way differently than I would teach a more diverse group, also because of time limitations. So if I was in front of a larger group, I would ask people to read it and comment or raise questions, but I don't think we have time to do that. But this is actually a very, very crucial text in both the Christian-Jewish encounter and the development of Rabbinic Judaism. For a couple of reasons. One is that, and I had this experience a few times when I was a Hillel director, students would come to me and they'd say, there's this evangelical who lives on my floor and they're always bothering me, and I finally sat down and studied with them, and they pointed out to me all of the passages where it says you need blood for atonement. And then we don't have the sacrifices anymore, and so they're telling me that Jesus is the blood for atonement. and what's our response? And the reality is that they're not generally well enough educated to know that we actually do have I mean, aside from the question of whether proof texting is the field on which you want to play, we, even playing the proof text game, have an answer, and it is this text, right? Yes, animal sacrifices were required for atonement. We no longer have them. And in a certain sense, the whole argument between rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity was, how do you gain atonement in a world absent the temple? The Christian answer is the sacrifice of Jesus of Nazareth. Our answer is al haTorah, al ha'avodah, al gimilut chasadim. So there is an answer. The second thing to note is that absent this move of saying that Torah, avodah, and gimilut chasadim is an acceptable substitute for the temple, Judaism goes out of business. I mean, if your main product is the temple ritual and there's no more temple ritual, what do? Right? The alternatives are either go out of business or find a substitute. And we found a substitute, and this is it. The third thing, and sometimes Christians will pick up on this more quickly than Jews, is that, I mean, if you look at the proof text, where is it from? Right? It's from Hosea. It's from a prophet, and not even one who's really in the top three of prophets for us. But the rabbinic chutzpah to say that we can sort of be doche a Torah-itic commandment on the basis of a verse from Hosea, it's a pretty impressive act of chutzpah, frankly, but I think, necessary for, again, for keeping us alive. And of course, to me, and I suspect for most of us, it's not just an adequate substitute for the temple. It's actually an improvement. But, within the Jewish movements, there might be an argument about that. But this is actually a very, very, very important text, and one that I think every Jew ought to know and appreciate, both in terms of its importance in the Jewish-Christian encounter, and especially in the debate with missionaries, which fortunately, I mean, we live in an era where that's not so crucial anymore, although for kids in college it still often is. Yeah. As well as understanding the development of our own tradition, that it didn't just sort of fall intact from the sky, but there's a history, and there are a lot of important historical junctions where crucial decisions were made that, had they gone the other way, we wouldn't be having this conversation today.
Thank you. Yeah, it would, if we did have the time, it would make for great conversation.
Yeah.
So let's move on. What's your main reason for your interest in this position?
Well, I alluded in a certain sense. I mean, I think that, first of all, there aren't too many similar positions. Most boards of rabbis are pretty much unstaffed. I mean, yeah. The DC Jewish community is almost as big as the Chicago community, and our board of rabbis is unstaffed. And therefore, I mean, although it does some good things, it's not nearly as effective as it could be. The other, honestly, is that, like many suburban synagogues, my synagogue is facing certain financial realities. And there are decisions that we could make that I think would anchor our survival for the medium term. I don't necessarily have full confidence that my leadership will be willing to make those decisions. I had a brief discussion with Jeff Weil. The pratim of the way they went is a little bit different than what's on our slate. But I would rather sort of not find myself in a situation where I really desperately need a position,
Yep.
and rather at this point be able to look at positions that really interest me and really, I think, fit my skill set and my desires, and see if they're available.
Makes sense. So share with us a little about your communal leadership experience.
All right. I was vice president of our local board of rabbis for about a year. Actually, Laura Rappaport, who we both know, she had that position, and then she moved out of Washington for a couple of years, so there was a vacancy. It was interfaith relationships, so I took the rest of her term. I've been on various boards, obviously, of different organizations. I also have, in terms of, it's not really Jewish communal leadership, but before moving to Gaithersburg, I was in Norwich, Connecticut for 7 years. Norwich is a small city of about 40,000 people. It is easy to be a big fish in a small pond. And when the city council decided to create an ethics commission, I was chosen to be the first chair of that commission. So not only did I chair the commission, but I oversaw the writing of the ethics code and our procedures and so on and so forth. And I think I did really a good service to the town, and also a good service to the Jewish community by, being somebody who represented us well in the larger public sphere. So I guess those are my two sort of main communal leadership experiences.
And how did you find them?
Well, I mean, the Board of Rabbis thing, I really enjoyed it. It put me as the Board of Rabbis representative on the board of the Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington. And I love interfaith. I mean, it's been an important part of my career, sometimes professionally and sometimes more avocationally, but always a key thing. And it's fascinating because, when I lived, my two prior pulpit experiences were both in small cities, York, Pennsylvania, and then Norwich, Connecticut, where by being a non-Christian, I was already exotic, right? And then around here, I'm just another English-speaking white guy. I met and worked with representatives of religion that in all honesty, as educated as I am, I didn't even know these religions existed. So it was fascinating. The main defect, or the main reason I didn't continue in that particular role, it is that Gaithersburg is a fairly distant suburb of DC. And the Interfaith Conference is in a fairly inaccessible part of DC. And so to go to the meetings was, a 6-hour it was really almost a whole day commitment. And I just couldn't continue past my term. The Ethics Commission stuff, also interesting, fascinating, a lot of fun. The reason I gave it up is my wife was elected to the Board of Education. And although there was no formal rule, because I don't know whether it was anticipated that, if your spouse occupies elected office, you can't continue on the Ethics Commission. But it seemed to me, rife for the potential of conflict of interest. And so I didn't actually resign. I just declined renomination.
Given that it was an ethics commission, it made sense that if it was ethically challenging, questionable, that's you back off of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, and especially look in a small town, especially, and I think one of the problems really in Norwich is that because it was a small town, I mean, like I would raise the issue, so five people take the civil service exam, and then the department head picks the person out of those five that they want, and they say, well, I went to high school with this guy, so I'll pick him.
Yeah.
Right. And in Norwich, that seems perfectly normal and perfectly reasonable. But it's actually not, and so, even to create the appearance, especially since, the Board of Education is 50% of the town's budget, 50% of the town's employees, it just, seemed, it didn't, if a case had come before the commission involving the school system, I think it would have.
Yeah. So it sounded like that was a pretty big cultural shift. Was that challenging to navigate your way through that?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, and interestingly enough, a case blew up after we had left town, where it turns out that the city-owned utility had been having retreats every year at the Kentucky Derby with no actual business, and chartered flights to Louisville from Groton. And so several people are actually now under indictment from the FBI for misusing public resources for their own benefit. And I grew up in New Jersey, and I was still shocked. But trying to educate people about what ethics norms really means, it's not always easy.
No, and not everyone is coming with the same values.
For sure.
So that leads us to an example of a topic where in our community we've actually had an issue not so long ago with I'd say within the context of Israel. We've had experiences with clergy in the community who have taken what I would term more of a non-Zionist approach towards Israel and been publicly engaged, wanting to be members of the CBR. Interesting topic. CBR, as you know, is connected with Federation. We view ourselves, I'd say, as a Zionist organization. So, if an issue, well, so how do you foresee dealing with Israel within the Jewish community, within the Jewish rabbinical community, at these moments where there are shifting beliefs and values associated with it?
Right. I mean, I think, in all honesty, and probably every candidate will say the following words, but nevertheless, they're true. It is, I think, the most complicated issue facing us right now, because there are cultural, but there are also generational differences. Having said that, back when, if I'm guessing at the particular issue, when it exploded, I was actually interviewed by a religion news service, was doing an article about how rabbis deal with Israel. And I said, Beferush, I could not be a member of a synagogue where Brant Rosen was the rabbi. But I also could not be a member of a synagogue where the rabbi got up every Shabbos and said, let's bomb Gaza back to the Stone Age. Having said that, I mean, to me, Israel is an important part of my current Jewish experience. I mean, we have watched, my wife and I have watched every Israeli TV series or movie available on Netflix or Amazon Prime. I will, if faced with two products, buy the Israeli product, even if it is more expensive and inferior in quality. I listen to Israeli music, etc. It's important to me, but it's important to me because part of how I was raised, part of how our generation was raised. I don't think that you can dictate to people that they have to feel a certain way, right? And that's where it becomes problematic. I mean, I'm involved here in Jews United for Justice. And some of the younger people and the interns and the younger staff are involved in If Not Now. And I mean, I just don't get If Not Now. And I ask them, well, what do you guys want? Because they won't. I mean, the Federation says, let's talk. And they say, we don't want to talk. We don't want to talk. We just want you to stop supporting the occupation. And I ask them, what does stop supporting the occupation mean? And they say, it means stop supporting the occupation. I mean, I can't even, and I want a dialogue, and believe me, I want to stop the occupation too. I mean, my politics are sort of classic labor Zionist / merits. I think the occupation corrupts Israel's soul. But both sides have to want to end the occupation. And whether you think the blame is 50-50, 80-20, 90-10 in either direction, Palestinians are not exactly blameless for the lack of peace and for the lack of a Palestinian state either. So, you know, I mean, I know it's complicated, is sometimes a cop-out, but it's really complicated. What I do think is really important is trying to have as broad a tent as possible. I mean, here in the DC area, we had a couple of interesting experiences that I think point toward a lack of tolerance on both ends of the spectrum. We're very fortunate to have the Haberman Institute for Adult Jewish Studies here. And they invited for Memorial Day weekend for their scholar in residence series, Hasia Diner, who is professor of history at NYU and for sure the leading expert on the history of Jewish immigration into the United States. She also made a statement, Haaretz, I think, I'm not sure exactly where the statement was made a couple of years ago, that she no longer wants to visit Israel. She no longer buys Israeli products. And when she sees the Israeli flag on the beam of a synagogue, it disgusts her and she doesn't want to go there. Statements that I utterly reject, more because they're just stupid than anything else. I mean, they don't really advance the dialogue. But they have nothing to do with her scholarly credentials to speak about the history of Jewish immigration. But the event was supposed to be at the JCC, and the JCC got pressure from more right-wing, and the JCC said, you can't hold it here. So they wound up in the Reconstructionist shul instead. But subsequent to that, the JCC started charging them for space instead of giving them to free. So next Memorial Day, Art Green is the scholar in residence, and you know, Baruch Hashem, he's speaking in my shul. We were happy to provide the space. You know, but I thought, you know, putting her in harem like that to me, that gives the JCC a black eye. It says that, you know, we're not open, especially when it had nothing to do with Israel. The flip side is that the JCRC here recently had a luncheon meeting with a couple of the high ups from CUFI, Christians United for Israel. And a number of colleagues said, we're not coming. We're not coming. Shame on the JCRC for inviting them, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, I raised the question, you know, how many people who think that the JCC was wrong to cancel Hasia Diner, you know, support the JCRC bringing Kufa and vice versa, right? In other words, I think a lot of people they don't really believe in dialogue. I mean, I think that the boundaries have to be very broad. Where exactly to draw the line is not clear. Like, I don't know whether the question of now that he's not in a shul, it's easier. I don't know whether the question of Brant Rosen's continued membership in the Board of Rabbis came up. Speaking as an individual, I would not have supported kicking him out if that was ever on the agenda.
He wasn't a member.
Okay. He was never a member.
He had allowed his membership to lapse for some amount of time.
Okay.
So it was
probably a best outcome.
It was a question of readmission.
Yeah. I mean, as I've read it, it doesn't say anything about Israel. I mean, one of the things that our Board of Rabbis says here is that you have to make an annual donation to the Federation.
Right.
Probably you guys do too.
Absolutely.
And that could, I think, weed out people on a certain level. I mean, certain people who are, strongly anti-Zionist might not be willing to donate to the Federation. And I think, to me, a key part of being inside the tent is at least being part of the federated community. But I don't think that we are well served. I mean, like, for example, I started as a Hillel director. I think the Hillel standards of partnership, I mean, whether it's actually the way they're written or whether people interpret them or understand them too narrowly, it's a problem sometimes, particularly on a college campus where dialogue is key. But, when you have a situation where Hillel says we can't sponsor a talk by the former Speaker of the Knesset because the Palestinian group wants to co-sponsor it, that's a bad situation. It does not make the Jewish community look good.
So bringing up Hillel, and I know that was much earlier in your career, there's aspects of this position that deal with mentoring and teaching young Jewish professionals within the context of federation, as well as working as part of a team, for outreach type programs. What's your experience been in that area of that mentoring and helping to facilitate and creating programming for perhaps disaffiliated groups of younger Jews or older Jews, but who are through federation? So what experience have you had, and how do you foresee doing that in the future?
Right. Well, I mean, on a formal level, since leaving Hillel, very little. We are more of a family-oriented suburb, so there aren't a lot of younger folks without kids, single or married, in the area that we really serve. I've certainly been invited over the years to do one-off programs for federations or other organizations. I have had, for example, young people studying with me for conversion, who I've mentored, I think, quite well. It's a little bit different because here you're talking about people, I think, who identify as Jewish, but are struggling really maybe to find their niche within the Jewish community. But having said that, I mean, I think I'm approachable. I know I'm a good teacher. I know I'm non-judgmental. And I think my experience in Rabbis Without Borders has also trained me to be a resource to a broader swath of the Jewish spectrum than my narrowly my rabbinic training would have provided. I did recently, within the last couple of years, Went back to school for the first time in a long time. I did a certificate program in Jewish educational technology through the Davidson School at JTS. And I think it bumped up my skills as a teacher, and it certainly, bumped up my ability to use technology in education.
Great. Because this is a multifaceted position, can you talk for a minute about organizational skills, how you would foresee managing? And Scott's on the call as well, right. So if you have questions about that, I'm sure you've talked already, but you can use right here.
Right. I think when given appropriate resources in terms of administration, I'm a competent administrator. I mean, there is, in all honesty, a reason why my dad was in the business world and my brother's in the business world, and I'm a rabbi, right? I mean, I would say administration is not something I have a passion for, but it's necessary sometimes to get things done, and we all do it. In terms of, I did speak with Scott briefly, and I'm very appreciative for that, and I think I got an understanding of the role. I do think that one thing, and certainly one thing that I've learned in my career, is that understanding expectations are clear, right? Understanding expectations is key, okay? And that there will have to be, I think, very clear parameters as to, what, I mean, you can say 50-50, but what does that mean exactly, right? And how are strengths evaluated in this 50% versus this 50%, and what takes priority when there's time crunch, and so on and so forth. So that, I think, has to be navigated fairly carefully. But anybody who's worked as a rabbi knows that you have multiple expectations, and everybody's an expert in your performance in the areas of your job that affect them directly, right? But they have no clue as to what you do with the other 90% of your time.
You drink coffee.
Excuse me?
You're drinking coffee.
Right. Well, that's a constant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Terrific. Tell me, I think this is my last question, and then we'll see if either Scott or Mark have a question they'd like to ask, and if there are things that you'd like us to know that we haven't covered yet. But I'm curious about your goals for the future, both personal as well as, and obviously it's got to be a challenge when you're not here and you're not in the position to think about where you'd like to see CBR go. But if you could have a vision, what might it be for yourself and for the CBR? Okay,
so let me kind of back into this. One of the things that I discussed with Scott is the nature of the position of that half of it, where you're a Jewish resource for the JUF, but you're not the Rav of the JUF. And he said that, some of the people he's discussed this with weren't thrilled about that or didn't quite understand that. And I said, the point where I am in my career is, I just want to be useful and helpful and teach people stuff that will make their lives better and make their work better. And I don't need credit, and I don't need my name in lights. I don't know that I would have said that 30 years ago, but that's the way I feel now. So I'm very comfortable. I mean, not that I'm ever reluctant to be in the forefront if that's necessary or helpful, but it's not a burning need that I have. And so I see the CBR as, any board of rabbis, and yes, not being in Chicago, it's hard for me to speak to the pratim of Chicago per se. But I think that it has two roles. One is helping its members do their job better, enjoy their work better, enjoy their life better, and to be a resource for rabbis. The other is to be the voice of the rabbinate in the broader community. So for me, and look, the fact that if I were to be offered and accept this position, I would be following Belinsky. I don't think you can ask for better. I mean, I don't see him as often as I would like, but I love him. And when we are back together, it's like we can pick up a conversation from 5 years ago as if we never left off. So I think that he's, a great resource to have around. But if I'm anything, I'm an amateur sociologist, right? So I think there has to be a lot of offerings for the members of the Board of Rabbis to help them understand what's going on in the Jewish community. I think that we all find it a challenge, in our generation, and Mark, I don't know you, but I can see we have similar amounts of gray, so we're probably around the same age.
Same beard.
In our era, Jewish pride and Jewish passion translated into belonging to stuff, and it no longer does, right? And we can rail against it and think it's terrible, but we have to work with it. So we have to understand what's going on. And so, I think programming for the members that helps us understand and helps us gain new tools to serve the whole community and not just necessarily the balabatim who are paying our salary. I think that that's an important role. And I know in terms of the other role of being the voice of the rabbinate, that there are certain things institutionalized already within the Board of Rabbis, like the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago and things like that. So, and again, I know that Belinsky has done a great job as the face of the Jewish community. And ironic that if it were me, the new face would be an HUC ordained conservative rabbi with a beard instead of an Orthodox rabbi without a beard. But that's the pluralism that we live with.
Terrific. So let me ask you, Scott and Mark, anything that you'd like to ask?
I just speaking for me, I don't think so. I mean, I have love to sit down and talk with you for another hour, Charles, but
sure.
Your answers were great. So I don't really have any questions.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, and Scott, I know you've been on the phone listening in. Anything? Okay, so I'll take that as a no.
Hello?
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I've been trying. Hi, Charles. My one question would be, could you lay out in just a brief sense, what a successful Board of Rabbis looks like for you?
Oh, okay. It's a great question. I think, first of all, a successful Board of Rabbis would be one that its members feel that they want to join and not just have to join. That it provides them the kinds of things that I've been talking about, so that its programs are worthwhile and not just interesting, but actually sort of add something to their lives, either help them do their work better or help their wellness or in some other way, that it's really a resource that they value. So that I think is key, at least klape panim. Klape chutz, I think, again, it's an organization that's respected, that if a statement comes from the Board of Rabbis, it's taken seriously. Also, and this is more complicated, I think, is that membership in the Board of Rabbis should say something about the person, right? And it's sometimes difficult because, you know, there are rabbis of varying competence and rabbis of varying skill sets, and even, unfortunately, varying levels of ethical behavior, you know, and yet you have bylaws that, you know, allow people to join if they meet a certain objective standard. But I think, you know, in that sense, I think that, to me, at least, as somebody who's not in Chicago, the Chicago Board of Rabbis looks like it's successful. Perhaps the most successful, I don't know, maybe New York, and I know there's a rivalry, New York and Chicago historically, but you know, I mean, I think that it is a successful Board of Rabbis, and I would hope to continue and build on that.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Were there any thoughts that you wanted to share with us that we did not cover in our questions, Charles?
No, I don't really think so. I mean, you know, the only thing that I would add, you know, is that, you know, obviously, if you're bringing somebody who's not from Chicago, there's a learning curve, right? And I really think that, particularly, you know, the members of the search committee, you know, if I'm your choice, you guys really have to be my partners in making this work for the first 6 months or a year. So I really understand that. You know, the other thing, I'll just a little anecdote. I mean, because Sid, you mentioned the weather in Chicago. Actually, we're getting an ice storm here right now too, and our electricity was cutting in and out for a while. I was afraid my Wi-Fi would go down, which is really very unusual because our utility lines are buried. So we don't have, but you know, if the transformer goes, then that's it. But the last time I interviewed for this exact position, I flew into Chicago, and it was about 65 degrees, and Suzanne Griffith met me at Midway, and she said, "Oh, it's always like this in Chicago in February." And I looked at her and said, because the first time I was ever in Chicago was in December '85 for the Georgetown DePaul game. And it had I mean, it was like 20 degrees below zero and a 900-mile-an-hour wind off of Lake Michigan. And I was like, you know, so I said, I've been here before. So, but it's a great city. And I you know, I think I'd enjoy it tremendously.
Terrific. Listen, thanks so much for your time. Our time frame, you're the first of these Zoom interviews, and we've got, because of logistics and our schedules, we're sort of stuck on Tuesday and Wednesdays for our conversation. So it's probably going to be 2 weeks until we've had all of these. I just want you to have an awareness. Yeah. If you have questions about something, feel free to be in touch with me, and we look forward to continuing the process. So thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Great day. Survive the weather.
Bye-bye.
Bye.